How's it going, EDH universe? I noticed there's a bit of a trend going around in the group where everyone wants to share their commanders, so I decided to do a different approach to it and make a video. Except I do not plan on showing off every single commander in my collection. I have about like 16 decks or something like that on the go, and I wanted to dive into my top 5 favorite decks instead, and give you guys a little idea of what makes them so special and what brings them into the top 5 in the first place. We've got a fun deck, a burn deck, a removal deck, a control deck, and a jank deck. And I even picked out a couple of my favorite Pauper EDH decks as well to show off. And I've picked about 9 to 10 cards out of each deck, out of the traditional EDH decks, and 3 out of the Pauper ones. So obviously we're going to start with the fun deck first. It's Nemata, Primevel Warden, and he's just got big heavy hitter cards like Lord of the Pit, because you know you're gonna be getting Saprolings so easily with his sack effect. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. When you do, create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. And then for a green, sack a Saproling to give Nemata +2/+2, or for a colorless and a black, sack 2 Saprolings to draw a card. So it's essentially, you have so many Saprolings you never really know what to do with. So that's why I've got the Lord of the Pit. He's just a big beater in the sky, and you've almost always got a Saproling to sack. And then the other card you guys might have noticed was Epic Struggle. I haven't really ever won with Epic Struggle yet, but it is a lot of fun to play and have people freak out about, oh, I'm going to wipe the board with some sort of board wipe and end up with however many Saprolings my opponents had in creatures. So it's sort of threatening in that regard. And then with so many Saprolings, I've got to play Coat of Arms. And then another card I think is hilarious is Urborg Justice. Target opponent chooses and buries a number of creatures he or she controls equal to the number of creatures put into my graveyard from play so far this turn. So if I'm sacking a bunch of Saprolings to some effect, then I can just play Urborg Justice for a black and a black to make my opponents sack their entire board of creatures, which of course, if Nemata's out, they get exiled instead, and then I get all my Saprolings back. And it's an instant, so it's hilarious. And then if I'm doing a replacement effect on my opponent's creatures that causes them to, instead of die, they get exiled, then Fecundity would be a fantastic inclusion in that, because they wouldn't get draw their creatures getting exiled. And then I wanted to show off a win con here that I've managed to pull off against a few people. It's Elvish Farmer and Butcher of Malakir. Because basically what's happening is, as long as I have a Saproling to sack, not only am I going to be gaining the 2 life, but that triggers Butcher of Malakir to make my opponents sack a creature, which is then going to get exiled, and then I'm going to get a Saproling back for every opponent I have. So I'm basically losing a Saproling, gain 2 life, get 3 back. So I can keep doing that until all my opponents have lost their creatures and I've got an army of Saprolings. And then I've got the classic Witherbloom Apprentice Chain of Smog combo in there too. And then I alluded to board wipes earlier, so I decided to pick out my favorite board wipe out of the whole deck. It's Ritual of Soot. Creatures, or destroy all creatures with CMC 3 or less, because Nemata's CMC's 4, so he's fine. But every other creature with CMC 3 or less goes away. So I'm able to take care of people's tokens. I lose my own tokens too, of course, but they're going to get replaced for as long as Nemata stays on the battlefield. So unless someone has like a path to exile, Nemata's going to get me all my Saprolings. And then the next deck I have here is my burn deck. It's not really burn, it's more like Demon Tribal, but essentially what I'm doing is I'm burning my opponents out. So I've got... Okay, so when Belakor the Dark Master ETBs, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of demons you control. So already you're going to be losing a lot of life in this deck. But whenever another demon ETBs under your control, that demon deals damage equal to its power to any target. So it's probably pretty important that I play a bit of lifelink, namely Whip of Erebos, because when a creature ETBs, it deals damage. Well, that's going to trigger lifelink. So immediately when whatever demon ETBs, I'm going to be gaining life equal to its power and bolting my opponent for whatever its power is. Plus, I can also reanimate stuff, so this is an all-star. And then I've got Demonic Bargain, of course for the flavor, but also because this deck has so many avenues to win with, and there's so much redundancy through damage doublers, damage triplers, that I feel comfortable playing this. And it was like, Sam Gwei is so awesome. He's done a couple cards now, but he knocks it out of the park with every illustration, which is what I love about him. And then Heartless Summoning is a fantastic spell. Oh, I'm a little blurry. Because pretty much every creature in my deck is not going to care about having its power and toughness reduced by 1. So usually I'm able to ramp out my demons like crazy and deal a ton of damage through all the ETBs going on. Creature spells I cast are 2 less, but there is a bit of a debuff on it. And then with blue, I've got a shapeshifter in here. You may have Mirror Image ETB as a copy of any creature you control. So it has to be something I control, which is what I want to do. I want to play Mirror Image and make him come in as a copy of a demon of some kind. That's ideally the best way to go about it. Now, I could play a bunch of other copy clone effects, like, what's that one? Phantasmal Image? But I like Mirror Image because of the artwork. So, Randy Vargas, there's like a big monster in the ocean. And I just don't know how heavily I want to lean into the clone effects. I'd rather just play good old-fashioned demons. And then Patriarch Spitting is an awesome win con because I can just bring all my demons back from the graveyard, and then each of them is going to be able to deal damage to somebody. Now, it is symmetrical. Each player chooses a creature type. Each player returns all creature cards of a type chosen this way from the graveyard to the battlefield. So for 5 mana, you can essentially win the game. And that's not even considering a potential damage doubler you might have on the battlefield. So speaking of damage multiplicators, multipliers, I've got Fire Emancipation. So this card usually pulls removal out of someone's hand pretty fast. Shifting Shadow is another cool card that not only fills my graveyard with stuff, but also lets me keep moving on into new demons. Enchanted creature has haste, and at the beginning of your upkeep, destroy this creature. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield and attach Shifting Shadow to it. Then put all other cards revealed this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. So you could see how that would be nice, being able to fill my graveyard and keep getting new creatures to enter the battlefield. And then Ether Flash is a cool way to punish any opponents that might be playing little hate bears like Aethersworn Canonist or whatever. Whenever any creature ETBs, Ether Flash deals 2 damage to it. So this hoses like Valken Archmage and Joyrus Familiar and all those combo cards that you see, like Vizier of Remedies. Actually, I think Vizier of Remedies might have 3 or more toughness. I can't really remember very well on her. But yeah, I've played Ether Flash and my opponents have hated me for it, so that's great. And then I've got Shallow Grave, one of the few reanimation spells I have in the deck, because you have to have your reanimation as an instant. It doesn't really bother me too much that it's the top creature, but it does get haste, so it's kind of like you're double dipping. Not only does it ETB deal damage to something, but then you can swing with it. Unfortunately, it does get exiled at the end of the game, but if you have a sack outlet before the end of your turn, you can sack it to that and you'll avoid the exile clause, although this deck doesn't really run a lot of sack outlets. And then Black Market Connections is the last card in this deck that I want to highlight because, hey, hire a mercenary, create a 3/2 shapeshifter. It's a demon. I'm going to lose 3 life, but I also get to deal 3 damage to something. So, in the spirit of Burn, it's all aggro, all damage, and I get a body out of it, right? And then third commander I have here is Toshiro Umezawa. I did a little heart around him. I was so happy when this card was reprinted, man. It was awesome. So, usually the way this deck loses is through, like, Craterhoof Behemoth or something. So I never really had an answer to that sort of effect until I discovered Withering Boon. Pay 3 life, counter target, summon spell. So, if someone's trying to play Decimator of Provinces or something, you can just show them Withering Boon. Hell, you could even say with Decimator of Provinces on the stack, I'm gonna destroy a creature, which triggers my commander. Oh, I should probably read my commander. Bushido 1. So whenever Toshiro blocks or becomes blocked, it gets +1/+1. But whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you may cast target instant card from your graveyard. If that spell will be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So imagine, like, your opponent plays Craterhoof Behemoth. You counter it with Withering Boon. It goes to your graveyard. And then next turn, they try to play Decimator of Provinces. Well, you can say, with that spell on the stack, I'm going to destroy a random creature somewhere else with Royal Assassin, assuming it's tapped, and you'll be able to flash this back from your graveyard and counter the Decimator of Provinces too. Got to pay 3 life for each cast, though, right? So, but that's the best card when it comes to stopping that sort of game-winning ETB. So I showed you the Royal Assassin. This card is awesome. Stops people from trying to swing at you, unless they got Vigilance. Tap it to destroy target tapped creature. It's just a 1/1. And then Withering Wretch, another cool card I love. For a colorless mana, remove target card in a graveyard from the game. So it's always nice to have that sort of thing. And then Crypt Incursion, more exile strategy. Exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard. You gain 3 life for each card exiled this way. So it's been pretty nice having that sort of thing when someone's trying to play Living Death or you're just low on health, because it can gain you a ton of health late game. And then Lord of the Forsaken, Flying Trample for a black, sack another creature, target player mills 3, or pay a life, add a colorless. Spend this mana only to cast a spell from your graveyard. So this card was made for Toshiro, right? It's a demon, which is awesome, but then if someone tries to, like, steal Toshiro through Blatant Thievery or something, you can just sack Toshiro to Lord of the Forsaken to prevent them from taking your commander. So immediately that's pretty nice. And then, of course, being able to generate the mana makes it a hell of a lot easier to cast spells from your graveyard. And then False Cure is another awesome way to basically eliminate someone who's trying to gain infinite life. Until end of turn, whenever a player gains life, that player loses 2 life for each 1 life he or she gained. So I like that one a lot. Tainted Pact, because you can just exile the top card of your library and maybe it'll be a swamp, and you'll say, sure, I'll put that swamp into my hand. Why not? I like a swamp. But then you can even cast it again from your graveyard and get another swamp. Or maybe you top deck something even better than a swamp and you say, God damn, this is a great card to have. I'm putting this in my hand. Dead Man's Chest, another nice gassy card. Enchant creature an opponent controls. Whenever an enchanted creature dies, exile cards from its owner's... Exile cards equal to its power from the top of its owner's library. You may cast non-lands from among them for as long as they remain exiled. You may spend mana as though any mana is lower mana of any type to cast them. So, I like that a lot. Bone Dancer, another example of using your opponent's resources. Put the top creature card of defending player's graveyard into play under your control. Bone Dancer deals 0 combat damage this turn. Use this ability only if Bone Dancer is attacking and unblocked and only once each turn. If your opponent only has 1 blocker, you kill it with a removal spell before attacking, and then there you go. You just got the creature for, like, barely anything. Sewer Nemesis. I like this card a lot. As Sewer Nemesis ETBs, choose a player. I usually just name myself. Sewer Nemesis' power and toughness reach equal to the number of cards in the chosen player's graveyard. Whenever the chosen player casts a spell, that player mills 1. So that's pretty awesome for me because I love to mill. But then this also gets bigger, which is kind of nice. And then Rise of the Dreadmarn. Super nice card from Kaldheim. Create X 2/2 Black Zombie Berserker creature tokens, where X is the number of non-token creatures that died this turn. could be a potential way to win if someone else is playing a board wipe, or if you just have a whole bunch of mana and you've just killed like 6 creatures through casting, flashbacking, and then having a death trigger, and then flashbacking another removal spell, and just keep going until you've only got like enough mana left to activate the Foretell cost, right? Because it's only Foretell 1 mana. And then my 4th deck, the control deck, it's Isperia the Inscrutable. Now this deck is kind of like, you've really got to be careful with what you're doing in this sort of scenario, because it kind of like, if someone accidentally shows you your hand because you're playing next to them, you know it's in that player's hand now, which is a big deal for this deck. 3/6 flyer. Whenever Isperia the Inscrutable deals combat damage to a player, name a card. That player reveals his or her hand. If he or she reveals the named card, search your library for a creature card with flying, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. So you're probably wondering what sort of flyers are in this thing, like if I'm calling it a control deck. Well, one of my favorites right here, Guiding Spirit. Flying 1/2, tap it. If the top card of target player's graveyard is a creature card, put that card on the top of that player's library. So this is cool because it can be used on your opponents to sort of like negate their draw. So if someone's someone's trying to like reanimate a creature, or if they played Mystical Tutor, or just any sort of tutor that puts the card on top of that player's library instead of into their hand, you can sort of like mess with them a little bit, and instead of them drawing the card they tutored for, you can say like, oh, I want to put your Sakura Tribe Elder on top of your library instead. Because nobody's going to play that and then sack it to get a land. They don't want to like shuffle their library and lose the card they put on top of it. So it definitely slows people down, and it is a lot of fun to play. And then we got Angel of Jubilation, another amazing control card. You guys know that one. Chancellor of the Annex, great card to stop Storm, Spellslinger, whatever. And then if I'm playing so many creature spells, I may as well punish people who are not playing so many creature spells with Dovescape. Whenever a player plays a non-creature spell, counter it. That player puts X, 1/1 white and blue bird creature tokens with flying into play, where X is that spell's CMC. So this is awesome because it can prevent people from board wiping, while I could still wipe the board if I really wanted to by playing Supreme Verdict or something, because of course it's an uncounterable board wipe. And then Glasses of Urza, for when you just absolutely need to look at someone's hand. Tap it, you may look at opponent's hand. So that's fun to sort of mess around with. And then speaking of looking at people's hands, we've got the new card, the Stone Brain. So I was pretty happy with this one. 2 CMC to cast it, but then 2 mana, tap it, exile the Stone Brain, choose a card name, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name, and exile them all. So you can just choose like Omniscience, or Nexus of Fate, or Cyclonic Rift, or whatever card you really, really don't want people to be playing. Just name it, exile it, and you get to look at their hand while you're doing it. So this card is Divine Gambit. It basically reads exile target permanent. I think it's non-land permanent actually. I got the Japanese one, but the drawback to this is that player may put an artifact, creature, or land, or maybe it's also an enchantment from their hand onto the battlefield. But this is an awesome card to play in this deck because if you know what's in everyone's hands, you can play this against the person who is just playing like little things. You wouldn't play this against someone who you know has a huge spell in their hand, right? So in that regard, it's kind of a nice removal spell in this deck. So I'll play it. It's playable. Nobody else seems to like Divine Gambit, but I give it a chance. So speaking of my commander's ability to deal combat damage to players, if this guy has Double Strike, then I can't lose. Even if I have no idea what's in their hand, I could name something blind, get it wrong, but they'll still have to reveal their hand, right? So in that regard, having Double Strike on my commander makes it so that maybe I'll with the first activation, but on the second combat damage trigger, his ability goes on the stack again, but by then, I've already seen their hand, and I'm able to name something that I'm certain they have in their hand. So Double Strike is awesome in this deck. I'm running pretty much every single way to get Double Strike. But Duelist's Heritage is easily the greatest because it's just 3 mana. And you can do it to any creature on board. Whenever one or more creatures attack, you may have target attacking creature gain Double Strike until end of turn. So you can use it to gang up on someone else. And then Sword of Fire and Ice because I'm going to be dealing combat damage to a lot of people. I'm Flyer's Tribal. And then the last card I want to talk about is Death or Glory. Separate all creature cards in your graveyard into 2 face-up piles. Remove the pile of an opponent's choice from the game and return the other to play. So this is a great late-game card. If you're playing against someone who's got black, and then another one of your opponents has black in their mana base, there's probably going to be a couple board wipes going around. That's when Death or Glory is so fantastic. And then the last traditional EDH deck I want to talk about is my jank deck. It's Sekki Seasons Guide. So let me read them out a bit. Sekki Seasons Guide comes into play with 8 1/1 counters on him, and if damage would be dealt to Sekki, prevent that damage. Remove that many +1/+1 counters from Sekki and put that many 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens into play. And then his last ability is sacrifice 8 spirits to return Sekki from your graveyard to play. So there's a lot going on with this commander. But everything should be explained in the 10 cards here. So, let's say, for example, 100 damage gets dealt to Sekki. It doesn't matter if he has 1/1 counter or 99 1/1 counters on him. He's still going to, of course, die because, it's 100 damage. It's being prevented, but he's having his counters removed until he goes down to 0, in which case he would die for being a 0/0. But I would still get however many spirits I'm being dealt damage. So, Leyline of Vitality is a pretty amazing card to play because it's a Soul Sisters, so you're going to be gaining like 100 life, or however much damage is being dealt to Sekki, but also creatures you control get +0/+1. So Sekki is no longer going to be a 0/0 after the damage is dealt. He's going to be a 0/1. So he's still going to be alive to block with and stuff like that. Another card here is Power Matrix. Tap Power Matrix to give target creature +1/+1 and gains flying, first strike, and trample. But it's 4 mana to cast, so it's quite a bit. But for that much value, it's totally playable in this deck because it makes him invulnerable until end of turn, essentially. He'll always remain as a 1/1 until your turn's over, in which case he'll die for real. But by then you should have more than enough spirits to sack 8 of them to just bring them back from the battlefield. Bring them back to the battlefield. And then Nirok Cover Sail for when you just straight up want to give him flying. So, like, what are you going to do with a flying 0/1, right? Well, look at this thing. Arashi, the Sky Asunder. X green, tap it. Arashi, the Sky Asunder deals X damage to target creature with flying. What creature with flying should we deal damage to? I don't know. Maybe Sekki? Because I'm going to get however many saplings I can put mana into this thing. And then it's also got Channel for colorless X. And then green, discard Arashi to have him deal X damage to each creature with flying. So if someone's playing Flyer's Tribal, you can just discard Arashi to wipe their board. And then another great sort of card similar is Soulclash Spider. Except it's essentially the same thing as Arashi's Channel, but you don't have to discard Soulclash Spider. You have to have him on the battlefield. And he can even block flyers, so that's awesome. And then Lure. All creatures able to block enchanted creature do so. So, say for example, someone just created infinite Felidar Sovereigns, Felidar Guardians off that Saheeli Rai combo. They can't actually attack with those yet. They don't have haste. So you've got one chance to swing into them and have them block Sekki with their infinite wolves or dogs or whatever the Felidar Guardian is. So you're going to get infinite spirits to block their infinite creatures with. So Lure is kind of fun in that regard. And then it gets weirder, though, because I've got Jangling Automaton in here. If Jangling Automaton attacks, untap all creatures defending player controls. So if someone just swung at you with 21 ones or whatever, they're tapped, right? So how are they supposed to block your commander if they're tapped? That's what makes Jangling Automaton so fantastic. And it's an Adam Rex illustration. One of my favorites. And then this card has to be in the deck, Pariah's Shield. All damage that will be dealt to me is dealt to Sekki instead. But it's 5 to cast and 3 to equip. But for that much value, it's pretty nice. So, like, that was a lot of mana to do that, right? Like, so not only are you playing every ramp spell you feel like playing, but you're also, of course, going to be playing snow-covered forests so that you can run extra planar lands and really get ahead of the competition. So that was all the traditional EDH decks, but one last collection of decks I want to show off is the Pauper EDH decks, starting with this Dimir guy. So he's a 1/3, he's blue and black to cast, and then whenever you discard a card, you may pay a colorless. If you do, amass 2. So, I mean, every time you discard a card, you're going to make your zombie army bigger by 2, right? So you're going to run loot effects, you're going to run loot effects, you're going to run loot effects, and then at the end of the game, you're going to have a huge zombie army, but it's going to be on the ground. So, like, what do you do with that, right? Well, you play Wingcrafter. For 1 mana, as long as Wingcrafter is paired with another creature, both creatures have flying. So immediately you have flying zombies for immediately 1 mana. And then, speaking of loot, we've got Soldevi Sage. Bit of a weird one, but it was printed as a common in its time. 2 mana for a 1/1, tap it, sack 2 lands, to draw 3 cards, then choose and discard 1 of them. So that's a bit of a downside, discarding 1 of them, because if you've got something like Sanitarium Skeleton already in hand, you can't exactly discard Sanitarium Skeleton. You have to discard 1 of the cards you drew just then. But, like, it's more of a late game guy. He brings you, or she brings you back into the game through sacking your lands. But in Pauper EDH, you probably got, like, a shit ton of lands because of how long the games go. So if you're someone who likes long games, Pauper EDH might be for you. But, like, with the sheer volume of spells that are causing me to loot or rummage or whatever, Sanitarium Skeleton is still fantastic value. And then we've got an Azorius guy. He's again another 2 mana 1/3. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may tap 2 untapped creatures you control. If you do, draw a card. And then he's also got this weird little ability down here. For 3 colorless, white, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. So I'm playing things like Sphinx's Disciple. 5 mana 2/2, flying. Whenever it becomes untapped, draw a card. So this is great, because not only is it a flyer, which is super valuable in Pauper EDH, but you can just tap it to Raff's ability instead of having to swing it to someone with it. Because what if they've got a bigger flyer? Then you wouldn't want to attack them. It's easier to just tap it, so that when it comes up to your next turn, it'll untap and you'll draw another card. And then you're going to need to play big. You're going to want to play big spells like Captain's Call for 4 mana. Create 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. That value doesn't get much better than that in Pauper EDH, gentlemen. So I like that a lot. Not only does it trigger the ability, but it also enables the ability, because you've got 3 1/1s to tap now, right? Like, that's amazing. And then the last card I want to show off is another flyer. It's Guardian Kirin. For 4 mana, it's a 2/3 flyer. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a 1/1 counter on Guardian Kirin. Like, he's going to get huge. He's going to get enormous. And people are going to say, oh my god, Guardian Kirin is so unfair. You've got like a 10/11 in the air. I don't know what to do. I don't have removal in hand because it's Pauper EDH, and removal is so hard to come by. It's out there, but it is hard to come by. And then the next card I want to talk about is another 2 CMC Pauper card called Vilespawn Spider. It's Simic, 2/3 with reach. He's a bit bigger than the others. At the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card, and then for 4 mana, 2 colorless, green-blue. Tap it, sack it, create a 1/1 green insect creature token for each creature card in your graveyard, but it has to be activated at sorcery speed. So that's like the big downside, is that you can't exactly do it on your opponent's end step. That'd be awesome. So we've got things like Keep Watch, draw a card for each attacking creature, because if you're going to have a bunch of creatures, a bunch of insects come into play, of course you're going to swing with the team. That's awesome. Then you're going to draw like, I don't know, like 10 cards. That's unheard of in Pauper. Next card is Fa'adia Seer. Fa'adia Seer. It's 2 mana, 1/1. Tap them, draw a card, and reveal that card. That's the downside, you gotta reveal it. If it is not a land card, discard it. But if it's not a land card, you want it in your graveyard anyway, because it's probably going to be a creature card, because of how many creatures you're running. But if it's a land card, that's fantastic. You basically just enabled yourself to keep playing lands and keep growing your mana base. And then we have a ton of mana dorks in this deck, and a lot of them tend to be elves. And Priest of Titania was printed as a common in her time. In fact, it's right here from the Urza Saga. Rebecca Gray illustration. Everything over this card is fantastic. Add a green for each elf in play. So that includes your opponents too, right? So that's pretty amazing. Imagine playing Keep Watch, drawing a ton of cards, and then having like however much green mana you had in elves that were on the battlefield at the time of you tapping Priest. You'd be set up. You'd be living like a king. And the last Pauper EDH deck is actually my favorite of them all. It's Walking Skyscraper. This card is so badass because it's got like a Mortal Engines sort of feeling. It's a walking skyscraper. Come on. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each modified creature you control. So it's probably pretty expensive to cast, right? It's 8 mana. There's no way you're paying 8 mana for that thing right out of the gate. You got to have modified creatures on board. So it's playing things like modular spells and just any sort of artifact creature that ETBs with a 1/1 counter on it. Or, you know, you've got like all your best equipment, because modified creatures need to be equipped for them to be modified. So, like, it's colorless though, so where are you getting your card draw from? You don't really have a lot of options. Emessi Tome. 4 mana to cast him, and then 5 mana, tap him to draw 2 cards, but you have to discard 1. So, like, doesn't get much better than that. It's hilariously bad. Play the shit out of it. And then, keeping on the Mortal Engines vibe, we've got Roving Keep. He is Defender, but for 7 mana, you cast him. And then for another 7 mana, Roving Keep gets +2/+0 and gains Trample, and can attack this turn as though it did not have a Defender. And he's already a 5/7, so if you activate the thing, he's a 7/7. Pay 7 mana, cast him. Pay 7 mana, activate his thing, turn him into a 7/7 with Trample. How cool is that? And then the last card, all aboard the Mad Max Fury Road hype train. It's Goblin War Wagon. It is another terrible card that, keeping on the theme of post-apocalyptic Mortal Engines, Mad Maxy vibe. Goblin War Wagon does not untap during your untap step. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2 colorless mana to untap Goblin War Wagon, and it's a 3/3. So, I mean, but like, what if you put an equipment on it? It'd be bigger. What if you gave it flying? It would be like a hover wagon. So, this deck is kind of like a pet deck of mine, but I love the shit out of it because it's such a weird Voltron sort of deck. So anyway, that's my video. If you made it all the way to the end, I hope you got a kick out of my crazy Pauper EDH decks. They're a lot of fun to play because the games always go on forever, which can be good or bad depending on who you are. So take care, and if it's cold where you are, then stay super warm. Bye.